What's up, guys? Welcome back to Newswave. Yesterday, there was a lot of commotion once again around the Switch 2 and tariffs. This time, though, it was from a report that was posted by Nikkei that seemed to point to 145% tariffs in the US on the Switch 2, and that would become a problem if it was really something that was a concern right now, but we'll go over all of that here today. Also, we are going to be talking about supply for the Switch 2 and a pretty serious update that hopefully shows we could be at least set up for a really good and available launch for the console. And Sony seems like they're preparing their own handheld, at least based on a survey they sent out around the Switch 2. And now we're getting some information as to what we can expect when it comes to power from that handheld. All of that and more today, guys. If you enjoy this video, make sure you hit that like button, helps out a ton. And if new here to the Spawn Wave channel, make sure you subscribe down below. And of course, members for the channel do get Newswave early. If you would like to learn more about that, click the join button or the link in the description down below. And we're going to start today with Assassin's Creed Shadows, as we have somewhat of a sales update for it, although I guess technically Ubisoft likes to just talk about player counts or players for the game. In this case, though, it is coming to us from Circana, or Matt Piscatella, over on Blue Sky we can see. He says, here's a fun one. Assassin's Creed Shadows has been the best-selling video game in the US for each of its first 3 weeks in market, according to Circana's retail tracking service. This dollar sales latest data through April 5th currently ranks number 2 year-to-date, trailing only Monster Hunter Wilds. Now, we will get the full report, the breakdown, everything. That comes out April 23rd, so 8 or 9 days or so, that'll at least be out. But this isn't it shouldn't be surprising for most people, it's not for me, that Assassin's Creed Shadows would top the US sales charts in the month that it released. Again, Assassin's Creed, big franchise, a lot of people buy in, kind of similar to Call of Duty or Madden or whatever. It's like every time a new one comes out, they check it out and typically buy into it. And for this one, I was still thinking we were looking at anywhere from 10 to 15 million copies sold in its lifetime. Very well could end up at 15 million, especially if they do like the DLC and kind of the roadmap they have planned out. Who knows, a Switch 2 release for it. So there are still a lot of avenues when it comes to sales. I mean, still needs to see its first full holiday, later on this year. So not shocking. Again, we'll see the full report, but at least as of now, it's rolling along. Good sales for Assassin's Creed Shadows, second only to Monster Hunter Wilds in the US so far this year. Also, we had a feature that was mentioned for Death Stranding 2, and I'm not really sure how to feel about this one. We can see this is posted by Genki, saying for boss battles in Death Stranding 2, presumably in easy mode, we'll still say, there will be an extra option on the game over screen below the continue option. This option will let you clear the boss battle and show you image and text description of the battle like a novel, instead to let you clear the boss battle more easily. So, okay, the idea is you can just skip all the boss battles if I guess they're too difficult. I don't know, it feels kind of weird for a video game to be like, oh yeah, some of these really cool spectacles, the big pivotal moments, I assume, in the game, the story, everything, you just skip if it's too hard. I mean, look, I know Kojima is definitely thinking more and more about movies in general, and apparently that's where he wants to get to after, I believe, Fizzant. I don't know, it seems strange. It's like, okay, skip this part of the game. We've had games that are skipping combat. It is like, okay, at what point do you just kind of put down the controller and watch the movie adaptation or the TV series when it comes out? Like, hey, Last of Us, yeah, that's happening now. It's really cool. I don't know, skipping large chunks of the game just because it might be a little too difficult. Let me know what you think about that one down below in the comments. Oh, and we did have another Switch 2 game that was announced. This we can see over in Gamatsu. Ys 10 Proud Nordics. It's a significantly upgraded version of Ys 10 Nordics. As new story content, features, all that will launch for the Switch 2 on July 31st in Japan. And kind of funny because technically Ys 10 came out in the West, I think in October, so it hasn't even been that long. Here comes the significantly upgraded version that they're going to sell again. It doesn't seem like there's an upgrade, kind of similar to what Atlas does with Persona 5 Royal, right? So I don't know when this is coming out outside of Japan. I assume a year after, so maybe sometime in 2020, end of 2026 maybe, we'll see this one release outside of Japan. But for now, look towards that one, I guess, over the summer. And guys, with some of the quick news out of the way, let's get into the bigger stuff. Let's start right away with the Switch 2 and tariffs, which, of course, that then relates to the idea of, will pre-orders come back at the same $450 and $500 price point, or will they be going up because there's just a ton of economic uncertainty right now? I mean, really, it is day to day, hour by hour. I just keep seeing stuff pop up around the idea of tariffs and much higher percentages than people were expecting. And in this case, a lot of it seems to be coming back to right now China. China and the US, it is just back and forth constantly with tariffs just going up like every day. And now they've reached a pretty high number in general, and it's something that Nikkei has pointed out here because while we've talked about Nintendo and a lot of their manufacturing for the US and Vietnam, they do still manufacture Switch 2 systems in China. In fact, it's quite a few systems. Now, we can see this posted up, and this is over on Fanboards. They did gather this information from Nikkei, and the thing with this is when you see these headlines, and then you have the article itself and the actual writing and the context behind a paywall, it's kind of difficult to kind of track down and figure out what's happening here. So I'll leave a link down below to not only Nikkei, but also Fanboards, who did have the full text here. But the Switch 2 and other game consoles made in China are likely to be hit by the trade war between the world's two biggest economies, despite the US announcing over the weekend that smartphones, notebook computers, and certain other tech products will be exempt from Trump's reciprocal tariffs. According to an internal assessment memo by a major Apple and Nintendo supplier seen by Nikkei Asia, game consoles are still subject to a 145% US tariff on goods made in China, which means products like Nintendo's highly anticipated new console are in line for a massive hit. The majority of Switch consoles are made in China, Nikkei Asia has learned, with a relatively small portion made in Vietnam. Nintendo already delayed pre-orders for the Switch 2 in the US as it gauged the impact of the reciprocal tariffs, Nikkei first reported. Many of Sony's PlayStation 5 consoles are made in China as well. And that's going to be interesting to see how Sony deals with that situation, because we've kind of seen when it's time to raise prices, they put the blog post out at like 2 a.m. and they move on. Like, that's it. And some of the price increases have been quite substantial at times for Sony, so they are clearly trying to avoid raising the price in the US, as we've discussed, but that time may come at this point based on how things are going between Sony and China. As for Nintendo in China, yes, they do still make a significant number of systems in China. Now, here's the thing. We've already discussed the fact that Nintendo has diverted basically all of their Vietnam manufacturing and stock to the US. Bloomberg had an entire bar chart and everything. How do you argue with that? So at this point, it was like 800 some odd thousand systems, and it seems like now they've been stockpiling over the last several months to prepare for some of this, which, Nintendo clearly was keeping an eye on all this stuff, as they should be with a launch like this. In that case, it seems like right now they've stockpiled enough for their launch to go over, I think, pretty well, which we'll get to some of the stock numbers here that seem to be floating around right now at a certain retailer. But when it comes to the 145% tariffs, they wouldn't necessarily be affecting Nintendo now because they are pulling their stock from Vietnam. Here's the thing, though, and I think this is important with Nikkei and what they're pointing out here. If there is an issue, as in maybe in Vietnam there's a problem with factories or manufacturing, something has to shut down, they technically would have to tap the stock they have in China, and that would affect things. Basically, Nintendo's kind of running on some thin margins right now, and they're sort of hamstrung as to where they can pull systems from, and it is down to basically Vietnam for the most part. Their accessories, which, yes, some of those are also made in China, not as pivotal. It's like AC adapter, you need that, but if an AC adapter doubled in price, you'd be like, well, that's annoying. Now it's $40 or $50. It's not like, wow, now this thing is $700 or $800, right? So that I think people can at least deal with, and one does come in the box. There's a charging grip and some other things. Outside of that, though, it's Vietnam and Cambodia for many of their accessories. So it seems like Nintendo has a handle on this thing currently, but it is certainly important to point out that you never know what the future could hold, and if things don't get worked out, Nintendo does have to tap stock from China. That could pose a significant problem. Here's hoping Nintendo doesn't have to figure that situation out, they have to cross that bridge, but I guess you never really know, and at least for now, they're looking for Vietnam to mostly hold up the stock in the US, at least until maybe some kind of trade negotiations are done to where things can be figured out and they can move on. Next up, let's actually stick with the stock for the Switch 2. Of course, people are pacing around online, it seems, waiting for pre-orders to go live, hoping they can get that system locked in for June 5th. And actually, here's some good news. We can see this is posted up. Now, this is from Nintendo. It says, according to some GameStop sources, most GameStop stores are expecting 100 Switch 2 consoles available at launch, but games and accessories will be extremely limited, which actually, we just talked about the accessories, some of them being sourced out of China. Okay, that kind of lines up. The games, though, are interesting. I'm curious about that one, but 100 Switch 2 consoles. I saw some people in the comments who were like, that's all they're going to get. That's actually quite a few per store. That's the big thing, per store. So there's like 2,300 GameStops, I think, floating around. So, I mean, that'd be pretty, I mean, almost 250,000 units that are then allocated to GameStop. That's a fair amount. And if you think about it this way, so when the PlayStation 5, that's like the last big generational launch, we had that in the Xbox. The PS5, I remember, was like 20 to 30 systems per GameStop store back then. And we're talking about, triple that even with the Switch 2 for GameStop. So that is still my play. I'm going to, as soon as pre-orders go live, I will look online to see if I can get one in there, but I'm definitely going to default to GameStop and go there in person and just try to get a pre-order in, because it seems like, at least according to some of the stuff floating around, they should have some pretty good stock. But I also think, just in general, Nintendo, they've been preparing for this for a while, and I think they're really going to hit the ground running as much as they can, of course, with, again, the tariffs we just went over. But I think there will be actually quite a good number of Switch 2 systems out and ready to go for launch. So hopefully that means everyone who wants one to actually play the thing, of course, can get one, because we know how this is going to go with scalpers. There'll be plenty of them around, and I'm sure they'll be trying to take advantage of the market. So hey, maybe Nintendo really does flood the market, and many of them get stuck with the system at pretty much still retail or even a little above that. I mean, they got to sell for 60 to 70% more just to have it all be worth it, because otherwise you're breaking even with eBay fees and shipping, all that kind of stuff. So hey, looking forward to these pre-orders going live, hoping for the same price pretty much as we had before, and just a ton of availability for people. Next up, let's talk about this elusive Sony handheld that apparently is out there right now in R&D. At least that's according to many sources, one of them being Kepler, and they even posted about power draw fabrication, which we can see this post up. This is over on Insider Gaming. It says, according to Kepler, L2, it's on NeoGAF, the same user who claimed that Sony is working on 2 SoCs for the PlayStation 6, which, real quick, Sony obviously is working on a PlayStation 6, and let's say we believe it's coming out in 2028, okay? Yeah, this thing would be underway by now. Like, they'd be really working to figure out the direction here, how they're going to do this, what any of the new features or wrinkles for the system would be, what the user experience, and all of that would be happening. So it is believable that, yes, this would be a thing that could potentially get out there, so keep that in mind. But 2 SoCs is an interesting one. The portable version of the new console won't be as powerful as the current gen PS5. In a reply to a question about the handheld system, Kepler claims it's a 15-watt SoC on 3 nanometer. Now, currently, people are looking at that saying, okay, the Steam Deck, like 15 to 20 watts for that. But that being 6 nanometer from AMD and this being 3 nanometer, it doesn't necessarily line up as well, I guess, there technically. But here's the thing, okay? Sony only needs so much out of the handheld, because unless they are developing a hybrid system, which if they're doing 2 SoCs, I assume they're doing a handheld, dedicated handheld, and then a dedicated home console. So kind of going back to the days, yes, of the Vita and the PS4, the Vita and the PS3, right in there. But it would still be able to, I feel like, play the same games, just not at 4K or 8K. It would really just need to tackle a 1080p screen. So it doesn't even need to be as powerful right now as a PlayStation 5 to potentially get some of those games. As long as I think it hold up its end of the bargain on, say, the CPU side, it really wouldn't be that big of an issue. It would just kind of be scaling with resolution and any other features, like maybe they turn ray tracing off. You get what I'm saying? They can try to fit this into a handheld and have it make sense from a power perspective, because you can't draw 40 watts in, I mean, I guess you could kind of do that, but like then your battery life would be like nothing, right? So you have to be really, really careful with the amount of power that's being drawn, and it really is trying to thread a needle here to make some of these games work. My only concern is that Sony approaches this with the idea that the handheld would get its own games and the console would get its own games. You can't do that, I don't think. I mean, Sony has a hard enough time, let's face it, putting out a nice cadence of releases from their first party for just the PS5. You include a handheld and start splitting up studios again, you're gonna pick and choose one of them and leave the other behind. We already saw that happen with the Vita. So as long as it can play the same console games from third party and first party, I think it makes a lot of sense to do this, just to at least have something out there for the handheld market that clearly is very interested in that way to play your games, with what we're seeing with something like the Switch or even the PC handhelds. Even though those aren't reaching like massive markets there, Sony has a way of doing that. I mean, they are very good at selling hardware. Handheld, that's the one I'd be curious to see them attempt again. but hopefully we find out here in a couple of years. I do wonder if it's something they would attempt to sell before 2028. I mean, they could put it out in 2027 and expect a longer cross-gen period this time, as long as it's still able to get games that are roughly in that PS5 category. I think it's something that would make sense for, 5 or 6 years easily after 2027, but otherwise, dual system or dual SKU release in 2028, a handheld, and a PlayStation 6 console. And in our last bit of news, let's talk about a new Star Wars game that was officially unveiled, but we are looking to see more later on this week. And this one is actually pretty exciting because it's once again Respawn doing something different. So take a look at this. This is posted up. This is the official website that's now gone live over on EA. Star Wars Zero Company. It says, tune in to Star Wars Celebration on April 19th for a first look at Star Wars Zero Company, a single-player, turn-based tactics game coming to PC, PlayStation 5, and Xbox Series X and S. I think this will already do better than Star Wars Outlaws. Why? Because immediately in the key art, there is a lightsaber. I know that is the most basic take ever, but I'm telling you, lightsabers sell. That's it. Okay, so it's a tactics-based RPG, as they're saying, single player, which it is funny that that's a selling point now, by the way. It used to be back in the day, oh yeah, it's just a tactics RPG that's coming out, and you'd immediately think, okay, yeah, cool, single player, great, it'll be a lot of fun. Now they have to put that in there as a descriptor. Anyway, apparently this is going to be similar to an XCOM style. We've had screenshots get out there before. EA didn't seem too happy about that. So I didn't necessarily just start throwing up in videos, but we do at least have some imagery around this game, and it's interesting to see Respawn do this, but I do like having something like this just to change things up a bit. And based on the screenshots, yes, very XCOM-like, but I think it actually looks pretty cool and could be a lot of fun. Again, a change of pace here for them, as they're also, of course, working on the third game in the Jedi series with Jedi Fallen Order, Jedi Survivor, and I guess whatever the last one, I assume for Cal Kestis, will be here. But at least for now, we'll look towards April 19th, as it seems like they're going to have a full live stream and everything, so we'll see what they have for us this weekend. And before we go to the comment of the day, we'll take a look at the poll that I posted up yesterday, where I ask, would you be interested in a new Sony handheld that plays games natively? So I said priced around $500. I mean, that's just where we are now. We're talking about things going up in terms of Sony with the PS5 now, more than 4 years into the generation. So 500 might be cheap by 2028. Who knows what the world will look like then. But 63% say no, 37% say yes. Okay, so here's some of the reasoning I saw, and the biggest one that stuck out to me, and I was like, yeah, I mean, that makes sense. And will they abandon it? Because they technically abandoned the Vita after they saw what the PS4 was doing, and we found out much later on from Sean Layden and Shuhei Yoshida that, look, we had split studios up, it wasn't working great to do that, and we had to focus on one, and obviously they were going to take the PS4 over the Vita, so they kicked the Vita to the curb and kept going, which ended up selling a little more than Wii U numbers, right? So there you go. But in this case, if they did come out with a system that was, I think, very interesting, very intriguing, sleek looking, the Vita still looks really good. But that's the thing, the Switch, awesome device. The Switch 2 looks great. It is still that setup where it's a hybrid, so it can't necessarily just be all about the portable aspect. There still have to be a lot of things built in to accommodate the docked setup, right? I would be curious to see what Sony could do with a lot of their knowledge when it comes to making handhelds. It feels like forever ago, but they have the R&D, of course, to do that, and what they'd come up with, because that's something else. Throw that in the mix with the PC handhelds, with Nintendo, that would just continue to add more ideas and more competition to the space, and that, of course, I hope, would give us just better products in the long run. And we'll finish up with the comment of the day, as you're seeing here. This is from Nico. It says, I would never thought that buying a console on day one is the cheapest way forward. Hey, look at that. Early adopters finally got a break here, which is funny. Usually you're buying into the system. It's super expensive day one, and we know over time it'll be cheaper. Like, look, you got a really cool PlayStation 3 when it first came out with the PS2 backwards compatibility, and it's highly coveted now. But like 3 years into that generation, people were kind of over PS2 games. They're looking for all the cool PS3 stuff. Then here comes the slim PS3, and it was $300. You probably felt a bit burned after buying that fat model PS3. Not so much now, because it plays the PS2 games, and it's awesome if you have that first release. But back then, it was like, okay, cool, Uncharted 2, this looks awesome. and the slim PS3 is $300. That's half of what I paid for it just a few years ago. Now though, it's like, hey, I got that $600 PS3. That was close. Because now they're like $1,000. And ladies and gentlemen, that's going to do it here for Newswave. If you enjoyed this video, guys, hit that like button. If not, hit the dislike. Leave comments down below about everything we talked about here today. If you missed yesterday's Newswave, I'll leave it up here in a card. Or maybe to hear more about how I think Nintendo is hiding something for Mario Kart World, and that Direct is going to give us some pretty good insight, of course. I'll leave that right below it. Thanks, guys, for watching, and I'll see you next time.